Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvina Vaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om, may the Divine Being look over us lovingly as a mother and father. May the Divine Being support and nourish us as a mother and father. May we have the strength and skill to study together the art of spirituality. May no misunderstandings arise amongst us. Om, peace, peace. Peace be unto us and to all beloved beings everywhere. Well, good evening, everyone. Namaste. Welcome to our Wednesday evening study group on Swami Vivekananda's Jnana Yoga. We're on the last chapter, the actual last chapter of that. There's a conclusion, which we'll take up when we're finished with this. But this is his talk on the real and the apparent man. The real and the apparent man. So before we go ahead, is there anything left over from last week that anyone would like to add from their own wisdom or experience, or anything, any concern or question that you'd like to raise based on what you recall of what we've studied of this talk so far? All right. The answer or the definition given last week wasn't very satisfactory. So I'm going to give a better definition of what is meant by us when the Swami says, according to us. By us, he means the Ramakrishna Holy Mother Vivekananda lineage of Indian spirituality, but it is not, when he says according to us, it's not a question of interpretation of scriptures or some punditry. It is based on their empirical experience, Ramakrishna's experience, Holy Mother's experience, Vivekananda's experience. So when they're saying this, that's what they mean, according to us. So according to us, there are three different goals for the soul. Those that are very spiritual when they die follow the solar rays and reach what is called the solar sphere, through which they reach what is called the lunar sphere, and through that they reach what is called the sphere of lightning. And here they meet with another soul who is already blessed, and he guides the newcomer forward to the highest of all spheres, which is called the Brahmaloka, the sphere or place of Brahm. There these souls attain to omniscience. Now when it says attain, they continue their flowering. They continue manifesting their infinitude. That's what it means to attain. There these souls attain to omniscience and omnipotence and become almost as powerful and all-knowing as God himself. And they reside there forever, according to the dualists, or according to the non-dualists, they become one with the universal at the end of the cycle. So before we go on to the next definition, is there anything you'd like to add or any concern or question you'd like to raise based on what the Swami has said? Okay. The next class of persons who have been doing good work, the next class of persons who have been doing good work with selfish motives are carried by the results of their good works when they die to what is called the Lunar Sphere, where there are various heavens, and there they acquire fine bodies, the bodies of gods. They become gods and live there and enjoy the blessing of heaven for a long period. And after that period is finished, the old karma is again upon them, and so they fall back again to the earth. They come down through the spheres of air and clouds and all these various regions, and at last reach the earth through raindrops. There on the earth, they attach themselves to some cereal, which is eventually eaten by some man who is fit to supply them with material to make a new body. Now, what is meant by material? It is what we understand to be the genetic makeup of the human being. That's how our modern science is. This is the material that the Swami is speaking of. The material to make a new body is our genetic inheritance. So that's the second definition of what happens to souls after they die. Any comment or concern or question regarding that definition and what it signifies?
Brother Shankara?
Yes, Swam.
Again, is the word man here used just as customary, or could it be man or woman? Cereal which is eventually eaten by some man.
The traditional understanding is that it actually comes through the male seed. So in the definition, the woman supplies something different. The woman supplies the energy which in the womb at the time of conception, there is, so to speak, a vacuum. And that vacuum pulls up through the egg this, what is called in the Upanishads, the tiny blue being, the size of a thumb. Now that being, it's as if there was a handkerchief or scarf that extended 360 degrees in every direction infinitely. But like a magician, I pulled up that scarf through my hand like this, and suddenly there was the scarf. And so we saw that portion, but we don't see the rest. That blue being the size of a thumb is the Atman, inseparable from the totality, but now, in this sense, individuated. So that is what is supplied by the woman through the egg. The potential for this to occur at conception. And so then the sperm entering the egg brings this genetic heritage. Now, of course, modern understanding of genetics is, as you know from being an MD, is quite different. That genetic material comes from both the man and the woman. I have nowhere near enough knowledge to resolve that apparent conflict. Does that answer it for you, dear? And is there any follow-up? I can't hear you. If you're speaking, I can't hear you.
No follow-up. And yes, it does answer my question.
Okay, dear, thank you. And it's a very good question, very relevant. Is this part of the paternalism of India, or is there some reality to it? As I say, I have nowhere near the understanding or knowledge to explain the apparent conflict between modern science and what the Swami was speaking of in 1896. Anything else from anyone?
Can you give an example of what good work with selfish motives looks like?
Yes, when the very wealthy will fund the building of a new wing of a hospital, with the understanding that that wing will be named after them, and so that's the Samson wing of that hospital. Or Bill Gates funding all of this research into diseases and so on. He very much wants credit for that. He wants acknowledgement that his billions are being invested in this way. It's not that it's a wrong or bad thing. It's just not the ideal. The ideal is to work with complete unselfishness. This is the ideal of karma yoga, and for that matter, bhakti yoga, and for that matter, raja yoga. But to work with a selfish motive is to want credit. And as Jesus said, yea, and verily, they have their reward when you act in that way. And so this is the Swami's explanation of what happens when you work with this selfish. Roberto, you've no doubt been in a hospital or some other. Well, my uncle John, was a very a nationally known, maybe even internationally, I don't know. Anyway, he was a mechanical engineer. And he taught at the University of California at Davis in California. And when they built a new mechanical engineering building, it was named after him. And though it was not his wish that this be done, he had passed away, but it was very much his family's wish that that be done. They donated a good deal of money. His wife and children donated a good deal of money to, but he was honored by the university in many ways. Besides that, so these are examples. Thank you, Roberto. That was a very pertinent question. Anything else from anyone? Okay, so this idea of various kinds of heavens, this you can find the definition of these different heavens. It's even in the Christian tradition. As Bob Dylan sang, "In my Father's house there are many mansions. Each one has a fireproof floor." And when Aaron gets annoyed that Moses seems to have more access to the divine presence than he does. God says to Aaron, well, he's my son. He has the run of all of the mansions, all of the parts of the house. And so this is not an unknown idea. Certainly in Buddhism, the Buddhists love classification, and they have you study the various schools of Buddhism, and there are so many different kinds of heavens and so many different kinds of hells. Anything else? Okay. The last class, namely the wicked, when they die, become ghosts or demons and live somewhere midway between the lunar sphere and this earth. Some try to disturb mankind. Some are friendly. And after living there for some time, they also fall back to the earth and become animals. After living for some time in an animal body, they get released and come back and become men again, and thus get one more chance to work out their salvation. So any question at all about this third class? The wicked, as he calls them, that become ghosts or demons.
Do they remember what wickedness or whatever they did that made them get a lower form, so that then they can work out? If they don't remember and if they end up being wicked again, then what happens?
We don't remember specifically, as the understanding from here is, we don't remember specifics, but we have an expanded knowledge of name and form. We have an expanded, and there is this connection. We see this in dreams, particularly nightmares. There is this understanding of horror. And so it isn't that they remember specifically as it's understood from here, but they do have that visceral memory that this produces that. And so they have the opportunity. If you want to read more about this, there is a chapter in the Gita, I think it's 17, that talks about the spiritual and the wicked and what happens to them. So it isn't that they remember specifically, although we do seem to remember, as I say, it shows up in the latent and active subconscious more than it does in waking awareness. But the knowledge seems to be there. Otherwise, they couldn't really move on. They would just be stuck. So there is that grace of a visceral, a subconscious knowledge that this leads to that. But they may go on being wicked for any number of lives, who knows? It just depends on how ignorant, or the depth of their ignorance. We must always keep in mind that these are, though they do wicked things, these are the divine being just as we are, but they're just immersed in deeper ignorance. So this is why Christ said, "Judge not, lest ye be judged." Pray for their salvation. Pray that they be lifted up. the wicked.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anything else? Thank you, Swayam. We see then that those who have nearly attained to perfection, in whom only very little of impurity remains, go to the Brahmaloka. I'm going to read that again because this answers a lot of our questions about what we think of as liberation. Liberation from having to take human form again. We do not have to be perfected. We do not have to be in a state, such a state that we enter nirvikalpa samadhi. No. So let's hear what the Swami says again. We hear it again. We see then that those who have nearly attained to perfection, in whom only a very little of impurity remains, go to the Brahmaloka through the rays of the sun. Those who were a middling sort of people, who did some good work here with the idea of going to heaven, go to the heavens in the lunar sphere and there obtain God bodies, which is, this is quite an enjoyable state. Yes, people do actually, they perform or pay for rituals to be performed on their behalf, both in the Indian tradition and in the Catholic tradition. They relish this idea of heaven, and they're not finished with they don't at all desire to be free from human birth. They want a higher, better human birth. That used to be taught in the Christian tradition as well. It remains in the masses. You can see the traces of it in the masses that you can pay for those who have gone on before you, who have passed out of the body before you. You can pay for masses for them to attain a higher state in heaven. And there's, as I say, traces of the implication that they will then return to a higher form of human life. So then they attain God bodies, but they have again to become men. And so, and in this case, of course, the men means human beings, not just men. They have again to become men, and so have one more chance to become perfect. Those that are very wicked become ghosts and demons, and then they may have to become animals. After that, they become men again, human beings again, and get another chance to perfect themselves. The earth is called the karma bhumi, the sphere of karma or action. The earth, this place where we're living, is called the karma bhumi, the sphere of karma. Here alone, man makes his good or bad karma. Now that's an interesting statement. Remember, this comes from direct empirical experience. This is not just some interpretation of scripture. Here alone, man makes his good or bad karma. When a man wants to go to heaven and does good works for that purpose, he becomes as good. He becomes as good and does not as. When a man wants to go to heaven and does good works for that purpose, he becomes as good and does not, as such, store up any bad karma. He just enjoys the effects of the good works he did on earth. And when his good karma is exhausted, there come upon him the resultant forces of all the evil karma he had previously stored up in life, and that brings him down again to this earth. For this, in the same way, those that become ghosts remain in that state, not giving rise to fresh karma. Notice that in this interim, there is no generation of new karma. Even in these wicked people, even if they try to disturb humanity, as he said before, they don't generate any new bad karma as a result. Primarily because most of them are not very successful, poltergeists and so on. They remain in that state, not giving rise to fresh karma, but suffer the evil results of their past misdeeds, and later on remain for a time in an animal body without causing any fresh karma. In other words, animals, cats, dogs, rabbits, lions, even though they prey on other things, that doesn't generate bad karma for them. When that period is finished, they too become men again. So, well, let's just read this next little bit and then we'll pause. The states of reward and punishment due to good and bad karma are devoid of the force generating fresh karmas. They have only to be enjoyed or suffered. If there is an extraordinarily good or an extraordinarily evil karma, it bears fruit very quickly. For instance, if a man has been doing many evil things all his life, but does one good act, the result of that one good act will immediately appear, but when that result has been gone through, all the evil acts must produce their results also. So the Swami has been going through all of this to give us some understanding of the workings of karma, where it works, where it doesn't. As long as you are here as a human being, you generate good and bad karma. If you're not here, that is, if you're in a heaven, or if you're in this sphere between the lunar sphere and the earth, or as a ghost or demon, you don't generate any karma. And if you must live as an animal for a time, you don't generate any karma. So it is only as a human, it is only as in being human that we generate the karma. This is what he's telling us. So any comments or questions at all about those thoughts and that way of seeing what it is to be human? Okay.
Brother Shankara?
Yes.
I imagine that generating negative karma involves things like lying, cheating, stealing, stuff like that. But does the Swami ever go into detail as to exactly what generates negative karma in the human life?
Not in this talk. If you read his book, Karma Yoga, if you read the talks collected as Karma Yoga, you find some further definitions of good and evil acts, because that is specifically, Karma Yoga is specifically devoted to our actions. So it's there. And to a lesser degree, there's some definition of it in Bhakti Yoga, And there is some very explicit definitions of those things to avoid that are more subtle. You know, there are subtle kinds of negativity, and those definitions you will find in the collection of talks that he gave in Thousand Island Park, which was published as Inspired Talks, Swami Vivekananda's Inspired Talks. And there he, because he's talking to a dozen of his closest disciples, he tells them some of the more subtle kinds of negativity that can arise. Those are three places, but primarily in karma yoga. Of course, this is all very clearly outlined in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras when he talks about the yamas, the restraints. What is it we are to restrain ourselves from that will generate negative karma? Negative karma produces an effect even here while we're alive. It agitates the mind as we're generating negative karma because of our selfishness. We're constantly thinking, how will this affect me? How will, if I do this, will it advantage me? If I do this, will it disadvantage me? If so-and-so does that, will it advantage or disadvantage me? It's always me, 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 I, me, mine. So there's a very clear definition, which of course has real parallels with the Ten Commandments of Moses. There's no mystery. Jesus discusses the more subtle aspects also, both in the Sermon on the Mount and when he says such things as judge not, lest ye be judged. And if a man asks you for your coat, give him your cloak also. Those kinds of more subtle ways of creating negativity, judging, and creating good karma by being beyond generous, being selfless. So that this is in Patanjali, you find the yamas, the restraints, and then if you abandon selfishness of the I, me, mine adversarial attitude, then what do you replace that with? Well, how do you generate these positive karmas? Well, Patanjali talks about the niyamas, the observances. So it's very carefully explained and very nicely laid out for us in good modern English by Swami Prabhavananda in his book, How to Know God, which is his translation of and commentary on Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. Any follow-up, Roberto? Anything more? Okay. Anything else from anyone?
Yes, Brother Shankara, I do have a question.
Yes, dear.
It says the states of reward and punishment due to good and bad karmas are devoid of the force of generating fresh karmas. They only have to be enjoyed or suffered. But does it mean that those karmas that earn those rewards and punishments are like burnt off because of enjoyment and suffering? So they
Yes,
are no
yes.
longer
Each karma that we suffer or enjoy now or in some other state of being, once it's finished, it's finished. So that's true of but when you're in these heavens, all of the negative karmas, all of the selfishness that it may have been part of your way of being, that's what brings you back to human form. So as the Swami says, you have a further chance to perfect yourself. But yes, when these karmas are exhausted, they're exhausted. And that's true now as much as it is in these other realms.
So if we are going through a particularly bad situation in life, we can consider that it's some bad karma being burned.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And we can console ourselves with that. That when this trough is finished and I then ascend to a peak on the as the results of the gunas manifesting my good karma, that too will not last. But at least that which produced the trough, it's exhausted. It's gone. It isn't like it's coming back and coming back and coming back. No. The cause produces an effect. When the effect is experienced and done with, it's finished. This is what Swami Vivekananda says in his book, The Doctrine of Karma.
That makes a lot of sense because now we can understand that every soul is eventually going to get liberated, because every time something is being burned, and then there's less to burn and less to burn, and eventually there is realization, scope for it.
Well, this is true of both the good and the bad karmas. It's when this is why Sri Ramakrishna prayed to Kali, take your good, take your bad, and give me pure love for thee. Take your pure, take your impure, and give me pure love for thee. Take your vidya, take your avidya, give me pure love for thee. It is that pure love which is karma-less. There is no karma associated with pure love. So he was saying, take all of the karma, the good, the bad, and give me pure love for thee. And that's Sri Ramakrishna's prayer. You can find it and you can rehearse it for yourself. But yes, when karmas are exhausted, they're exhausted. When a given karma is finished, it's exhausted. It doesn't keep revisiting you. You may generate a new karma because you remain ignorant in the same way that created the prior karma. This is why we need to be so careful to learn from our experience and modify our behavior accordingly. It's ignorance that creates bad karmas, and it's a higher form of ignorance, for all that matter, that creates good karmas. Anything else from anyone?
Brother Shankara, if there is a random act of violence on a perfectly nice person who's walking down the street, who's done nothing wrong to anybody, is innocently walking a dog or something, are even random acts of violence predestined? I mean, predestined as in karmic dues?
Well, I'll give the example of my son. My son was walking his dog one evening in the neighborhood where he lives, and 4 drunk men set upon him, knocked him to the ground, kicked him so badly it really damaged his shoulder and broke a rib, and robbed him of his money. And they were drunk. And they were also Hispanic. But that's not of any consequence except for the fact that there was great resentment. And there is great resentment among a lot of the Hispanic people in California. You know, they remember that California was stolen from them. So anyway, they were shouting racial epithets at him. Now, my son, being a devotee and a disciple of Swami Prabhupada since age 9, first, of course, he was angry. But after he recovered his centeredness, he thought, well, this was my karma. Am I still capable of violence? Am I still capable of violence? And he took this into meditation, and he, watching his thoughts, came to the conclusion that though he was no longer capable of physical violence, he was indeed still capable of psychological violence. And so began to work on his, using the tools of meditation and change in behavior. He began to work on making sure that he did not manifest that capability of inflicting psychological violence. He's a senior manager and has a lot of people working for him. And so he became even more careful in dealing with those people that that report to him. So there is no such thing as a random, according to karma, according to the doctrine of karma. There is no such thing as a random act of violence. Does that get it, Krishna Kali?
So we should condone violence. We should do what?
What?
I mean, it's
What
okay.
are you saying? Condone violence?
No,
Of course, we don't condone violence. Anyone who's violence deserves to suffer the consequences of law. Why would we condone violence? To understand something is not to condone it. Is that clear?
So just wait for, I mean, let karma take its course, let the law take its course. That's how it should be. And we should just work on ourselves. Is that so?
Well, karma is going to take its course. There's no question about that. Did my son report what happened to him to the law? Yes. Were 3 of these 4 young men who attacked him arrested? Yes. Did he testify in court against them? Yes. Did they suffer punishment at law? Yes. None of that there's no condoning. This is just that there's no condoning. Understanding is not to condone. There is a difference between judgment and understanding. You'll notice that there was no judgment. It was simply, this was an illegal act perpetrated against my son. And so he duly reported it and followed up and so on. The 4th young man had apparently fled back to Mexico and so wasn't apprehended. So there's no condoning.
Your son's name is Bimal, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And I was also a victim of a racial hatred attack in Los Angeles. And I guess the theory is that both Bimal and I had committed such a crime in a past life.
That's not the way the doctrine of karma works, dear. It may be that you did, but it is that you still have the propensity for it. This is why my son, though he was initially angry and felt, all of the things that we just naturally feel as a result of our emotional makeup, he quickly recovered his center and said, what is it in me that drew this? So and he concluded that though he was no longer capable of physical violence, he really did come to that. I was so proud of him when he told me this story, because he did really look at himself critically, not just judge these men. Oh, they were wrong for doing this to me. Well, of course it was wrong for them to do it to him, which is why they suffer the consequences of law. This is against the law to perpetrate this kind of violence. But he looked at himself and said, what is it in me that remains to be purified, that remains to be corrected? And he came to the conclusion that he was still capable of psychological violence, which is actually, in the long run, more harmful to people than physical violence as a general rule, because it undermines their sense of self. Does that get it, Brahmadas, or is there more?
No, I was just thinking of someone I knew who preferred to do fighting in the psychological, and yes, it is damaging as physical. I would agree with that.
Yeah, actually, it seems to have more long-term effects than physical violence, and unless you're really physically damaged. It took a long time for my son to recover the use of that shoulder properly. Anything else from anyone? How are we doing for time? Okay, it's 8:17.
Brother Shankara,
Yes, dear.
this is a great example which I hope I can use when something comes to me that I question why it happened, to contemplate on what is it in me that needs to change so that this won't happen again. So it's a wonderful example. But if we can revisit that question again, because I'm still a little confused about it says the states of reward and punishment due to good and bad karmas are devoid of the force of generating fresh karmas. So basically the karmas are getting burnt up, the good and bad, and they're not generating fresh karmas.
Well, that's when we're no longer embodied. We're in these other states.
I see, okay. Okay.
But as I said, even when we're embodied, once we experience the results of the karma, that karma is finished. It's burnt. It's done.
Right.
Now, does the propensity for generating some new karma like that remain in us? If we are still capable of inflicting psychological violence, then that's what will happen to us. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, because the obverse is also true. If you do unto them negative, if you inflict psychological violence, you can expect psychological violence will be visited on you.
Brother Shankara,
Yes.
I'm under the impression, I've been under the impression that karma doesn't burn automatically. It if you exhibit, in other words, we'll use your son for an example. If he maintains the potential to exercise that mental punishment, that karma doesn't get burnt. If he stays as he was, he that has to something has to change. You have to not remain the same person that you were that generated that karma. You have to recognize that that is not something that you should be doing, and make a concerted effort, even more so than an effort. You have to really determine to stop it. Then that karma gets burned.
Well, that's another way of looking at it, Robert. It's not the understanding from here, but
Well, straighten me out, because that's the way. That's
no. I said I'm not going to try to correct you. Your understanding is a perfectly workable one. It isn't the understanding from here, but that doesn't mean that I have the last word. The understanding from here is that, as Holy Mother said, you can lessen the effects of your karma, but if you don't, and those things that you still need to learn because of your past behavior, your past thoughts, your past actions, your past speech, they require that you lose a leg. You'll lose that leg. If you don't understand what's happened to you and you resent losing your leg and you develop hatred and resentment toward universe for costing you your leg, then you're probably going to lose another leg because you haven't learned what you need to learn.
right.
But it would be a new set of karma that you're generating because you still haven't learned the lesson. If indeed you've learned the lesson as you were portraying it, then what Holy Mother says, something must happen so you won't lose a leg, but you will receive a scratch. Now, these are very fine. This is why I said to Roberto, if you want to understand this in greater detail from Swami Vivekananda's point of view, read the book, the collection of talks gathered together as Karma Yoga, and then for the more subtle aspects, read inspired talks to find what Vivekananda says in more detail.
I think we're in agreement. We just look at it from two different points of view.
That's why I said I didn't feel like there was any need to correct you, Robert. If you act on what you said, if you behave as you said to behave, then you'll do just fine. As I believe my son is doing just fine, because of the way he dealt with his situation. That's why I said I was so proud of him, because of the way he dealt with it. Okay, we've got just a few minutes left. Is there anything else from anyone, or shall we read on?
I have a quick question, Brother Shankara.
Yes.
Is the act of reproduction considered negative karma, positive karma, or neutral?
Are you talking about producing children?
Yes.
So if you produce children and take good care of them, it's very good karma. If you produce children, you're giving children. This is why the Catholic Church, it isn't, people say, oh, the Catholic Church wants people to have lots of children so the Catholic Church will become bigger. No, that's not it at all. It is so that more souls have the opportunity to be human and to perfect themselves. So if you have children and care for them lovingly and with the consideration, particularly if you deal with them as the divine being from the moment they're born, and project that sense on them that they are the divine being and you're privileged to have them in your presence, and that then it's very, very good karma indeed. Now, it's still karma. It's a kind of purification, because to raise children in the way that has just been described requires a level of selflessness, a very high level of selflessness. There's a great deal of sacrifice in raising children, particularly more than if you have 2 or more children. So the act of reproduction, the act of reproduction is not inherently bad. It is the addiction to sensuality that gets you attached. So that's the act of the sexual act that produces children is very sacred indeed. And if you want to read about this in some detail, get the book Love Poems from God and read the testimony of these 12 realized souls that are collected together in that wonderful book. And without exception, they talk about the sacredness of human sexuality. They also remark on the tendency of human beings to become hooked on the sensual aspect of it. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Well, if there's a follow-on, that would be fine. Okay. All right, I think we'll leave it there. We'll start with all men who do certain good and great acts and so on. That's where we'll start next week. Any final thought from anyone about what we've read tonight, or anything else having to do with this whole great subject of what it is to be the real and at the same time the apparent human being? It is a very, very interesting. That's what was talked about this last Sunday. The wonder of this stardust spacesuit, this embodiment.
Brother Shankara?
Yes, dear.
So the same principle of what your son applied when he faced violence, can we apply the same thing when we face other obstacles like fear or doubt or guilt or jealousy or whatever?
Well, those are the fetters, dear. Those are the fetters. And they're imaginary. It isn't that there's nothing to fear. It isn't that there's nothing ever to be ashamed of. But the fetters are a way for us to limit ourselves. So that if we say, oh, I don't know what's going to happen, so I probably shouldn't do that. Even though Every fiber of your being says to you, you should do that. So if you restrain yourself because of fear, because you don't know what the consequences will be, then you've limited your ability to grow. We learn by making mistakes. We don't learn from repeating our successes. We learn from making mistakes. So we go ahead, and it may be that everything works out fine. And you see, oh, there was no reason to be afraid of anything anyway. Or it may be that you trip over your shoelaces and skin your knee. You think, oh, well, there was something to be concerned about, but it wasn't all that serious. We must beware of letting these fetters limit us. We are the unlimited being in a limited, having a limited experience as a human being. But the purpose, as the Swami said earlier, this is the karma bhumi. This is the realm of action. And if you want to, I think this is chapter 15 in the Gita. It's called The Field and Its Knower. And I highly recommend reading that for the answer, the deep answer to your question, Swayam. And we must always keep in mind that behind all of the appearance is the fact that, in fact, we are not the doer. So when we remain in that, when we hold that to our heart, if we take seriously what Krishna says in chapters 2 through 6 of the Gita, if we just let that sink in, then we get clear on who's doing what and what is the nature of limitation. And then if you jump ahead to chapter 15, The Field and Its Knower, I think that's the number. Anyway, that's the title of the chapter, The Field and Its Knower. Then you get a very clear definition of what this field of action is, this karma bhumi, and who it is that is knowing what is going on here. And for that matter, creating it.
Thank you.
You bet. Any last thought or concern or question from anyone? All right, dear. What a wonderful gathering this evening. Om Asato Ma Satkamaya. Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya. Mrityor Ma Amritangamaya. Abir Moiti. O dearly beloved, lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from this realm of endless noise and relentless confusion to thine abode of silence, serenity, clarity, and peace. Lead us from darkness to light. Lead us from darkness and ignorance to the brilliance of thy wisdom and love. Lead us from darkness and ignorance to the brilliance of thy wisdom and love. Lead us from death to immortality. Light us through and through, light us through and through, with thy everlasting, shining presence. Jai Shri Guru Maharaj Ji Ki Jai, Durga Durga Durga. May we be safe, may we be healthy, may we be cheerful, may we have peace of mind, and may we go forward in the loving and protective embrace of the Divine Being as our Mother and Father. Any final thought from anyone? All right, dears. Well, that's it until Saturday. Krishna Kali, did you have something?
No, I was just going to say Jai Durga, Jai Ma.
Jai Durga, Jai Ma. So that's it until Saturday, when we'll take up Swami Prabhupananda's How to Know God. And that's the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras according to Swami Prabhupananda. And then on Sunday, the talk will be a Karma Raja cocktail. A Karma Raja cocktail. What is the blend? What is the intersection, the powerful intersection for us of Karma Yoga, which we've been studying this month, and Raja Yoga, which we'll study next month. So that's Sunday. All right, dears. Until next time, Jai Shri Guru Maharaj Ji Ki Jai, Jai Durga Jai Ma.
Good night.
Good night, Robert.
Thank you.
Pranams.